Hello, and welcome to my presentation for LZ679 Ethics, Power and Professionalism. In this presentation, I'll be exploring ethical dilemmas within the tabloid newspapers. My aims of this presentation are first to define and understand what we mean by ethics and following an ethical code. I will also explore what my personal ethical values are and how I would implement them into my own work as an aspiring journalist. I will then explore my case study, which will be how the Sun's representation of black Premier League footballer Raheem Sterling in their front pages can be deemed as unethical and even racist. And after looking at that, I will then explore how I would deal with these ethical dilemmas differently and in a way that follows my own ethical values. First, a little bit about me. My name is John Frost, and I'm a third year student studying at the University of Brighton. My aspirations for life after university are to get into the world of journalism in one way or another. My ardent interests include sport and music, and my ambition is to take advantage of my passion for writing and journalism to one day work within these industries. So, what do we mean by ethics? Sidgwick defines ethical practice as any rational procedure by which we determine what individual human beings ought to do or what is right for them to do. In Sidgwick's definition, he highlights how ethics is about what is the right thing to do. However, this alters between different companies and newspapers. A brief example would be how the employees of The Sun follow their own ethical code on what they believe to be ethical and correct. However, other people will deem their practices completely unethical, which I will be examining further in this presentation with my case study. Patterson's definition is similar, a rational process founded on certain agreed-on principles. In Patterson's definition, he highlights how there are regulatory bodies for creating codes of ethics, in addition to companies creating their own code of ethics to work by. This ensures that a certain company has an ethical practice by following these codes that are set out by regulating bodies. To summarize ethics, Caldroy says that ethics is concerned first with how we should act, and second, with how consequently to build a framework for thinking about how we should act. In Chris Frost's book, Journalism, Ethics and Regulation, he defines ethics as a way of studying morality. In journalism, subjectivism and objectivism can be seen throughout newspaper ethical practices. Subjectivism explores how ethical judgments are neither true nor false, or if those judgments are true or false, they are always individualistically applicable to the psychology of the person who utters them. Subjectivism highlights each person's individual ethics. Others can disagree with your individual ethical conduct. However, your personal psychology is prominent. This is particularly pertinent throughout journalism itself, as different journalists from different newspapers will have their own subjective ethical code that they follow. As alluded to before with Sidgwick's definition for ethics, about what individual human beings believe what is right to do. Objectivism explores a set of guiding principles which will hold true for all. This can also be applied to journalism, as there are regulating bodies that are set out which create a set of principles that all will deem as ethical. Despite this, there are times when newspapers and journalists ignore some of these regulations in order to spin a story in a way that will make their scoop all that more enticing to their readers, despite being unethical, and I will explore this more in my case study. As mentioned previously, there are regulatory bodies that have been set up for organisations to follow to create an ethical practice. When done unethically, unethical journalism can cause considerable damage, whether it be the breach of someone's privacy, disinformation, or discrimination coverage which targets minorities. Unethical journalism can cause sizable harm to individuals and to society as a whole. This is why regulatory bodies like the Independent Press Standards Organisation and the National Union of Journalists are so important to try and control our news. IPSO is the independent regulator for most of the UK's newspapers, and they aim to uphold the highest professional standards in the UK press. In addition to the IPSO, the National Union of Journalists support journalists through their code of conduct to ensure ethical practice throughout all journalist stories. They write that the code's purpose is to advise members and other journalists on how to carry out their work ethically. It has been used by journalists over the decades to challenge unethical instructions. and produce content that is honestly conveyed, accurate, and fair. In order to explore ethical issues from tabloid newspapers, I will be looking at the Sun's portrayal of Raheem Sterling, a black Premiership footballer, and how the way they write headlines about Sterling differs from his white England teammates. Ever since Raheem Sterling burst onto the scene in the Premier League, the Sun has always portrayed him in a negative way, playing into the discriminatory stereotypes that come with being a black footballer. For years, the Sun would put out headlines that exaggerate the truth and make Raheem Sterling look like a disgraced footballer, whilst at the same time parade his white footballing teammates who were doing the same thing. The Sun is a new UK newspaper that became a tabloid in 1969 when it was purchased by Rupert Murdoch. The Sun is a newspaper which has been a part of many previous controversies and unethical practices in its past. One of the most famous being the coverage of the 1989 Hillsborough disaster, when 96 Liverpool fans tragically lost their lives when a stadium stand collapsed. In the Sun's initial report on the disaster, they spanned the story their own way and made it seem as if the fans were at fault. They only offered an apology 15 years later in 2004, and then a further apology in 2016, when the Hillsborough inquiry closed and families could celebrate verdicts and the justice that they have waited 27 years for. A more recent controversy was the Sun's coverage and portrayal of TV presenter Caroline Flack, whose months of ongoing false information of a domestic abuse case and an onslaught of online hate led to Flack taking her own life. Many people blame tabloids like The Sun for their portrayal of Caroline Flack, which ultimately drove her to suicide. In 2018, Sterling was pictured with a new leg tattoo of an M16 assault rifle, with the attached headline, "Raheem shoots himself in the foot, gun tap fury." This headline immediately portrays Sterling in a negative light, attaching the connotation of his new gun tattoo and a glamorization of gun culture, linking black youths to gun crime. The story quotes anti-gun campaigners demanding the Manchester City player is dropped from the England squad for the World Cup in Russia. This comes in addition to all the negative headlines that the Sun have attached to Raheem Sterling in the past, claiming that Sterling was partying 24 hours after saying he was too tired to play for England in a Euro 2016 qualifier. And the Sun also ran another story headlined "Obscene Raheem" about him showing off his house on social media in 2016. Something that white footballers like James Maddison have done since, but never received any of the headlines that Sterling got. This is particularly relevant when compared to how the Sun write about other Premier League footballers like Harry Kane and James Maddison, who was mentioned before. Harry Kane, who was painted as England's golden boy who could do no wrong in their eyes, and is paraded as a national hero. This signals a conversation that the Sun's portrayal of Raheem Sterling is more discriminatory and racist, as well as being unethical. So, what are the ethical shortcomings in the Sun's portrayal of Raheem Sterling? Firstly, there was no clear indication that they attempted to even try to contact Sterling about the tattoo. This meant that they were able to put their own spin on it and make it something that it is not, which is not only false information, but also biased and in turn unethical. An important journalist ethical practice is to make sure that all sides of the story have been sourced, but the Sun's complete omission of any attempt to get Sterling to comment is an unethical practice. Furthermore, this breaks ethical codes that governing bodies have set out, with the National Union of Journalists Code ensuring that produced content is honestly conveyed, accurate and fair, which in this case, without getting all sides of the story, it is not. Secondly, the Sun disregard the febrile climate surrounding Raheem Sterling at the time of publishing the story, as he was the victim of a racist attack for which a man was jailed for 6 weeks for in December 2017. There have been racial undertones to a lot of other media coverage about Sterling, particularly from the Sun itself, and this lack of sensitivity around a serious topic and even adding fuel to the fire of racism by linking a young black man like Sterling to gun crime is both unethical and discriminatory. In addition to this, the Sun also presents the reader with taken for granted assumptions that link black youths to gun crime, which further implies the unethical racial prejudice towards Raheem Sterling. So how would I have handled the portrayal of Raheem Sterling differently if I was reporting it? Firstly, I would make sure that I follow the IPSO and NUJ's guidance and code of ethics to ensure my journalism is ethical and credible. Secondly, I must understand that the industry is highly competitive and demanding. However, I will ensure that I will not sacrifice the integrity of my work by being unethical to reach the desired outcome, just like The Sun did by creating headlines that portray a certain individual in a stereotypical and discriminatory way. And finally, I will ensure that my articles are fair and unbiased, ensuring that everyone involved in the story has a say so that I am presented a clear and concise report. I will ensure I keep true to my ethical values, which include being kind, being honest, having integrity with my work, and professionalism. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below.